Welcome to Master of Science with host Professor James McCanney. The good professor's career spans 50 years as a university teacher, scientist, and engineer. Each week, he will explore the rapidly changing world of science as many long-held theories are crumbling under the weight of new data. He will cover the fields of geology, archaeology, meteorology, oceanography, space science, astronomy, cosmology, biological evolution, virology, energy, mathematics, and more. So please welcome the host of Master of Science, James McCanney.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome back, and I hope you've been watching all of these. If not, if this is your first visit or if you've only seen a few of these programs, go back to the original first program, July 2nd of 2024, and watch all of these in succession, because there's a logical path, progression between these shows. You can watch one at a time, that's not a problem. But you should go back and pick them up from the beginning and watch them in order. Okay, so a lot of topics to cover tonight, and a lot of people like this poster behind me, and then some people thought it was a green screen. No, I don't use a green screen. This is a live studio. And I got a lot of comments, good comments about this poster, and this is the actual poster behind me. I could touch it right here. But it's a poster that was the 30-year anniversary poster. Now, this was done in 2009. It would have been the 30-year anniversary. So that was 15 years ago when this poster was made, and it's been on my web page available, one of the 3 posters that I sell actually on my web page. But it's a derivative of a poster that I took to an American Geophysical Union meeting where I was a presenter. And so it has similar information. In that particular American Geophysical Union meeting, it was in Toronto in 2009. I was presenting on troposphere weather systems related to electricity coming from the sun and the progression coming down to the surface of planet Earth here where we live, the troposphere it's called. That's where the weather systems form, what we call weather. Okay, and so how does the energy get down here to form clouds and tornadoes and hurricanes and lightning, all of that? Where does that come from? So that was what my other poster was about, and this is somewhat of a derivative. And I do these myself. I build them in PowerPoint and I take them to be printed, but there's a lot of detail on one of these posters. So anyway, that's a real poster behind me, not a green screen. I don't do green screens. Okay, so many topics to cover tonight. The main science topic tonight, I'm going to be talking about Nikola Tesla. Now, to cover Tesla, it's going to take many shows, and so I sprinkled them out. This is the first one, part 1, and this will continue for every 4 or 5 shows possibly. I'll get back to the topic of Tesla. I'll also have shows on Albert Einstein and other famous scientists and mathematicians. But Tesla is a unique character, that's all you can say. But anyway, I'll be talking about him. I should start out by mentioning that he was born in Eastern Europe, and he was raised his father was a curator of one of the Vatican libraries in Kosovo. And it has since been blown up by Bill Clinton. That was one of Bill Clinton's mastermind genius. What are these people thinking, blowing up a church with tremendous archives that are historical? But they blew it up. This is where Tesla was raised, and he was a physicist. He was a very well-trained physicist and a very good student. So in the 1800s, the late 1800s, and all of this stuff he came up with was just absolutely phenomenal. We are still using Tesla technology to deliver electricity today. And that'll be one of the topics. I'll be talking about his famous death ray. What was that all about? How did it work? And the question is, how do I fit into all of this? I have a book. It's called Atlantis to Tesla, The Colburn Connection. And that was published in, about 2002 is when it was actually released. There's a coast-to-coast AM radio show with host George Norrie. And the story of that book was that I had been talking to friends and other physicists, etc., about my discoveries. And of course, those discoveries went back into 1979 to 81 school year when I was putting all this together at Cornell University. I was on the faculty physics and math department there in Ithaca, New York. And I was talking to people about Tesla and how I had rediscovered what Tesla was doing. And I discovered a lot of things that Tesla really didn't know. Nikola Tesla died in about 1944. And so before the end of World War II, he was an elderly man. And I don't think he really died the way they said he did. I think he was kind of kidnapped because he was on his way to England to sell the death ray technology. And what that amounted to is that taking out aircraft, incoming aircraft. They already had radar in England. They had the radar belt, so when the German planes came across the water and made landfall or came above the land, of course, in England, the radar systems could pick it up. So they had radar, but what Tesla was selling was, he called it a death ray. And what it amounted to is he could basically cause airplanes to become dysfunctional, fall out of the sky, and using, and I'm going to go into the details of exactly what that was because there's a lot of speculation. And if you go on the internet, oh my goodness, you hear every goofy thing you could possibly imagine, which is not the Tesla death ray. He had amazing inventions like just the generators, the electric motors, the system of delivering AC power and then the transformers to transform them. He had the Tesla turbine, an amazing concept where you take running water and turn it into centrifugal force and a radial force on an axial spindle, and then to cause rotational transfer of energy, kinetic energy of moving water or moving fluids in general. Okay, so all of these, I'll be talking about these, and so I'll be explaining with some figures and diagrams, etc. So that's coming. Okay, first of all, I have a few comments, pick up some pieces from previous weeks. Let's see. This was demoting Pluto. I talked about this last week, and I didn't go through the whole story, but I wanted to get more science in on the fact that Pluto is a growing planet, and it's growing with nitrogen compounds. It was actually snowing nitrogen into the atmosphere when the New Horizons spacecraft flew by, took a picture. Some of the close-up pictures, you could see the actual layering of the nitrogen snow falling down on the surface, building up. And of course, there was water ice there. But the topic came about dealing with Pluto was the 9th planet. So when you were in grade school, when I was in grade school or any place up to 10 years ago, if you were in school, Pluto was the 9th planet. All of a sudden, it got demoted from being a planet. Now, what was that all about? Well, I explained that all of a sudden, astronomers had discovered thousands of other planets outside of Pluto, but orbiting our sun. And these are planets. I mean, they're round objects. So the astronomers, in their infinite wisdom, guffaw, decided that any object that didn't clean out its path gravitationally as it orbits the sun would not be considered a planet. and I made it's like the reality joke is goofiness, that if Pluto were where Earth is, Pluto would be a planet, and if Earth were where Pluto is, Earth would not be a planet. And so a lot of people consider that if an object has enough latent heat of formation to cause it to be a globe, in other words, it pulls itself together into a sphere because of gravity, then it should be considered a planet. And I agree with that because, okay, so the other reason, which I didn't mention last week, that Pluto was demoted from being a planet, because if they found one more planet, and they found thousands of other planets, then they would have discovered something called Planet 10, the 10th planet. But see, the Roman numeral 10 is in X. And there was a big, and I'll go through this too in a future show. I don't want to cover that topic right away, but I'll be talking about something called Planet X, and the entire just milieu of just disinformation, and oh my goodness, the Planet X days were just absolutely crazy. But a lot of disinformation coming out from literally the CIA, because the CIA is the pinnacle in the United States. They control, including NASA. And one of the big efforts to take over NASA by the CIA was done in 1991, when a guy named Robert Harrington and his assistant, Tom Van Flandern, actually discovered Planet X, literally the 10th planet. And it turned out to be the nucleus of Hale-Bopp, the comet. And so that's a very complicated story. I have a book on that. It's called The Real History of Planet X 2020 Update, and it goes through that whole history, so you can read about that. Very complicated history with a lot of players and a lot of craziness. Just that's all you can say is craziness. And then through the 2000s, about at least every week, some new person had come out. Planet X is going to be here next month. It's going to crash into Earth, and just craziness. And this just went on and on. Anyway, I'm not going to cover that. But the point about Pluto is they had to demote Pluto from being the 9th planet, because then the next discovered planet would be Planet X, or X being the Roman numeral. So Planet X has two meanings. If you go back into history, going back literally to the 1700s, the term Planet X was real, because they had thought that they had found planets. There was one called Vulcan, which they thought they found near the sun. Turned out to be non-existent. But if they discovered something, or if they were looking for something, that's how Neptune and Uranus were discovered, and Pluto, in fact, was discovered through searches for this next planet, because the current planets out to Saturn were not behaving properly. And so the idea was that Planet X was just a placeholder until they actually discovered something, and then it was given a name by the International Astronomical Community, which names things typically after mythological characters. Because literally the first planets were named after mythological characters. Zeus being Jupiter, and so on. Mars being a mythological character of the pantheon of gods of the Greeks and Romans. But at any rate, and that carried down to modern astronomy, literally. So the idea was that Planet X then would be, once it was discovered and named, then that designation X would go away. So there was a dual meaning. But it just happened to be also, it was such a sensitive topic that they did not want Pluto to be a planet. And then NASA, the white hats that I call them, the NASA good boys, the white hats, would come riding in and save the day and find Planet 9, which used to be Pluto. And you see the little trick that they played, because they didn't want to discover Planet X, because then everybody would say, well, see, you found Planet X. And no, they didn't want to do that. They wanted to then find Planet 9. So this silliness went on in the astronomical community, but I wanted to clarify that. That was another reason why Pluto was demoted from being a planet, because then there were only 8 planets, and if NASA went out and did a search for one and found one, which they did, they found not one but thousands of them, then that would be Planet 9, not Planet 10 or Planet X. Okay, so at any rate, the other day the Chinese came back with a load of rocks from the far side of the moon, which was supposedly a scientific first. And then they're studying these now, claiming to be studying the history of the moon. Now, another piece of silly science going on. Every day, tremendous quantities of space rocks, literally, we don't know where they come from. They might come from another galaxy. They might come from another star system. We have no idea where this stuff comes from. It might be part of our solar system. We don't know. It's just raining into Earth and hitting the moon. Well, the moon doesn't have an atmosphere, so these little things down to the small grain of sand don't burn up. When they hit the moon, they just pile up. So what happens on the moon? The stuff on the surface of the moon has nothing to do with the moon. It's stuff that fell in over the ages from someplace else. So they pick up some of these rocks, bring them back to Earth, and then make the claim that they're studying the moon. Well, no, you would have to go way, way, way down. I mean, you'd have to drill potentially miles down into the lunar mantle and through the surface of the moon to get to something that might even be closely related to part of the original moon. It could be 100 miles down. We don't know. We don't have any information about this at all. So when somebody tells you they have moon rocks, tell them that you got a bridge to sell them, and it's goofy, it's silly science. So spending a lot of time and a lot of money doing absolutely ridiculous science. And this also goes towards the age of the universe. I think my very first show I talked about the idea that the universe, they're trying to put an age on it. Well, that's been thoroughly debunked, because the James Webb Telescope finally has convinced the majority of sane scientists around the world that the Big Bang idea of the universe being 13.5 billion years old simply is fallacy. So the end result is simply the following. We don't know how old the universe is by measuring, because what happens, light leaves some galaxy far, far away, billions of light years away, and it arrives to us. Well, what we're seeing there is what was there billions of years ago. What is there now is something totally different. And so that's a measure, a method of trying to measure the age of the universe. But when you start finding things, galaxies, etc., that are farther away than your estimated age of the beginning of the universe in a Big Bang, then you got a little problem. And so here's the end result. As you build bigger and bigger telescopes, as you build bigger and bigger telescopes, you see farther and farther. So the James Webb Telescope is seeing things that were not visible in the Hubble telescope. In the Hubble telescope, we're seeing things that were not visible in the Earth's biggest telescopes up to that point. And if you go back through history, this is what's happened all along. Every time you build a bigger, better telescope, you see more stuff. And that's telling you that that was beyond the limit, the capabilities of that previous telescope. And so it would make sense that the next telescope we build that's bigger and better than the James Webb Telescope is going to see more than it's seeing. And so where's the edge of the universe? Now, if you could take your equipment, take the James Webb Telescope or the Hubble Telescope, and put it at the location of the farthest thing it can see, it's probably going to see that far into a functioning universe that much farther. And if you put it, again, that far, leapfrogging, so to speak, out into space, every time you could move your telescope farther and farther, you would see the same. So the universe, we cannot measure it. And so there's no beginning measurable as far as the universe is concerned. But here's the point. Don't get upset about this. Don't let this ruin your day. The reason astronomers, astrophysicists the reason they liked the Big Bang idea is because they are atheists, the vast majority of scientists, which is strange. You look out into this immensely organized universe, the protons and electrons on the far side of the universe are the same as they are here. So there's amazing, amazing organization. The carbon atoms on the far side of the universe are the same. You don't find a quirky carbon atom someplace on the far side of the universe that's different. They're the same. So there's a huge plan here, which brings us back to the idea that there's a tremendous design here, which comes back, and then the fact that humans, if you look at the amount of substance in human beings, and we're supposedly intelligent beings, the reason I believe human beings and this whole food chain leading up to human beings exists is one simple thing, because we have the ability to look up and see the stars, see the heavens, and just say, wow, thank you for putting me here. Thank you for giving me this life. And, and be appreciative and understand that there's a tremendous entity that is in charge of all of this. And here's the deal. Scientists want to think they're smart and they know everything. Scientists want to think that they're intelligent and they've figured everything out. So the end result is we're not. We don't know everything. In fact, every time man comes along with a theory, it turns out to be false or needs to be modified or whatever. We're just scratching the surface of understanding the universe. And so we're just understanding it. There's what we're seeing here is a huge design. Okay, so the end result is we don't know when the universe began. We're not going to be able to figure it out. And we don't know the time frame, we don't know the extent of it. But here's the real problem: is the human mind is very finite. And I'll give you an example. Take and throw a bunch of quarters or something, apples, whatever you want, out on a table, a bunch of them. And your eyes and your brain, the way they're connected, if there's one or two or three, you immediately know there's 1, 2, or 3. But if there's 4, you have to go, okay, there's 3 there and 1 there. 3 is the maximum identifiable group that your eyes and mind can comprehend. So what would people do? If you had 30 apples on a table, if you divided them into groups of 10, then you would have 3 in a group, 10 groups. And then you could look at the 10 groups and you could put those in order, 2 rows of 5, and all of a sudden now that makes sense. You have 30. And so the number 30 is a decimal representation, it's a numerical representation of the things you have on the table. But your eyes and your brain are only wired to understand 3 things at most. If you put more things out there, they don't understand them. So in mathematics, we have things like proof by induction, it's called. How do you understand infinity in mathematics? Where you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You could keep counting as much as you want. You could have numbers as big as you want. And they're still small numbers compared to infinity. So the human mind is not set up to understand infinity. So the end result is that we have things that we use, kind of tricks. And induction is one of them. And here's how induction works. You start out, it comes from a mathematical development called Peano's postulates, the basis for number systems. And it starts like this. If you have the number 0, and you can create a 1 from that by adding 1, then you can create an infinite number of progressive numbers after that. So 1 will beget 2, 2 will beget 3, etc. And with that, with induction, you can understand there are certain types of proofs. For example, the old Greek proof dealing with the infinite number of prime numbers, for example, is a proof by induction. Very interesting, very subtle. So the Greeks understood this concept. But it's because the human mind cannot grasp infinities. There's a gentleman named George Cantor. I took a course on infinities in my mathematics studies in college. And it was a whole course dealing with infinities. I believe I've talked about this on this show. But it's because the human mind has trouble understanding this concept of infinity. Okay, so with that said, let me see if there's any other topics here. Yeah, let me jump into the topic of Tesla now. So Nikola Tesla, very interesting, and I think probably some of his most interesting studies had to do with atmospheric electricity. Atmospheric electricity. Now, what's interesting is, remember, Tesla lived in the late 1800s, did a lot of his good work. In the late 1800s, he brought an exhibition to the Chicago Fair. It was like an international fair. And they wired it up to have light bulbs, and they had a generator, a Tesla generator. They were able to generate electricity for the Chicago Fair, and it was just the talk of the nation, talk of the world, that now there was electricity and you could have light coming in with energy coming in on a wire. So that was the late 1800s, just to give you a time frame of when Tesla lived, where he was very active. He was a physicist. He was raised in a very strict physics background. And then he came to the United States, and he worked for Edison for a short while. And there's a lot of conflict there. I'm not going to talk about that at all. But he went off on his own. And there were the issues, and maybe I'll get into a little bit when we talk about the Wardenclyffe Towers and his Colorado Spring operation. I'll talk about the problems he had with financiers, mainly J.P. Morgan and Westinghouse and some of the big New York financiers that were funding his projects, and then some of his discoveries. For example, I'll just give you one little example. When he developed his generator equipment, now this would take energy from either running water, like like a dam, and or a generator, like a steam generator or whatever, because at that time they had steam engines, and you could hook up and take that rotary energy and then drive a Tesla generator, which generated an alternate current, and then you could send it out on wires. It was much more efficient than DC current, which was being developed by Edison, which turned out to be very dangerous. You had to have many, many more power plants much closer to the source. And DC currents, you had to deliver the entire load there with very high currents. And the advantage of AC is you could deliver at long distance, high voltage, low current, and then convert it down to the low voltage that was what you used in the application at the house or the industry. So Tesla developed all of this. It was amazing, and of course eventually that's what won out, and that's what we're still using today. When you see the current, the power plants, etc., everything you see there was developed by Tesla. So actually truly amazing. But the issue he had with Westinghouse was that he had developed his generators, his electrical distribution systems, and he sold it to Westinghouse for, I believe the amount was around $4 million, which was a huge amount of money at the time. But he had one contingency in his contract, and that contingency was that he would be able to use energy from the grid, the Westinghouse power grid, as he wanted, and then he would be able to, if he put it back, he would not be charged. And that would allow him to do his experiments. And that's when he went off and in the early 1900s built the Wardenclyffe Tower. And so the Wardenclyffe Tower, there's a lot of misinformation about what it was doing. But here's the actual story. The Wardenclyffe Tower was extracting energy from the vertical electric field. Now Tesla, in early 1900s, knew that there was a vertical electric field in the atmosphere of Earth. It's about 300 volts per meter, which is a lot. And so the average person, say a person 5 or 6 feet tall, would have close to between 500 and 600 volts between the top of their head and their feet. Well, typically that would be enough to electrocute a person and kill them. But it doesn't happen. So why doesn't it happen? Well, the reason is because the Earth has a dielectric. We live in a capacitor, an electrical capacitor. And these were the things that I found out. Now understand that Tesla knew some of these items, but he didn't know the extent of the vertical electric field because they didn't, they had rudimentary airplanes, but they had no idea where the ionosphere was or the top of our atmosphere or where outer space began. They had none of this information back in the early 1900s, let alone all the way up to where Tesla died in 1944, where he was taken out of the scene, so to speak. And so anyway, what he was doing with the Wardenclyffe Tower, there's a lot of misinformation that says he was transmitting energy from the Wardenclyffe Tower out to receivers. Well, that's completely false, because where was he supposed to get the energy to transmit? And it turns out that the energy he was deriving it from the vertical electric field. And I talk about this in my book, Atlantis to Tesla, the Copeland Connection. And so what I did is I rediscovered what Tesla was doing, and I was able to add a lot of information because when Tesla was around, he really didn't understand where did the vertical electric field come from, what was the extent of our atmosphere, where did the other side of the capacitor live up in our ionosphere. He knew it was up there someplace, but he also knew how to, I call it drilling an electrical hole through the dielectric, which is Earth's atmosphere, to tap into that power source. Then that goes on, and then I'll talk about hurricanes, for example, what's powering hurricanes. It's that same vertical electric field. What causes lightning? The vertical electric field. And where does that come from? Well, it's a component of the electric field of the sun. So Earth does not generate this by itself. It is part of a larger capacitor system that's powered by the fusion of the sun. And of course, Tesla did not know that. So what I did is I put together the physics of how all of this works. And I've mentioned before, this is something that was picked up by tier 1 levels of science. And this allowed me, for example, to design electromagnetic propulsion systems. Why would you design an electromagnetic propulsion system if you didn't understand the layering of electromagnetic fields around Earth or around the solar system where you would utilize these? So anyway, that's my role in this, and that goes back, like I say, to my original studies 50 years ago, and then building on what Tesla did and then understanding what Tesla did and giving a whole new layer of understanding. Okay, So Tesla was a very good student and came to the United States. He has something like, well over 100 patents to his name. And these are all very important patents. There's a dispute that goes on between Marconi and Tesla regarding who invented the electromagnetic forms of communication, where radios, in other words, what we call radio, and all of the other forms of signaling electromagnetic radiation that we see today come from these original discoveries of Tesla. So the claim is back and forth, well, did Marconi discover this independently, or did he use Tesla's technologies to, in fact, create the same technologies that Tesla was creating? So I'm not going to get into these controversies and try and decide it on this show. That's a whole another subject on its own. But what I want to do here is concentrate on the science, on the physics of Tesla and Tesla's inventions. Okay, now to clarify something a little bit, I'm going to talk about the Wardenclyffe Tower because it's such a great example. It uses so many of Tesla's technologies. But basically here is how it works. And by the way, this is something that has been kept from the public because there's so much misinformation that's intentionally put out there, trying to make people think that the Tesla Tower, the Wardenclyffe Tower, was designed to transmit energy from the bell tower, from the top tower, and that's not what Tesla was using it for. So anyway, the vertical electric field, like I say, is about 300 volts per meter, which is huge, but it doesn't discharge. Why is there not current flowing down? And the reason is because we have this beautiful dielectric atmosphere. Now, what is a dielectric? A dielectric, say you have two capacitor plates. One is charged positively, one is charged negatively. And you charge them up to a certain point, and at that point, they can no longer, the surface, the energy at the surface of the plates is overcome by the electric fields, and electrons start to discharge between them, and it no longer works as a capacitor. So every capacitor has a breakdown voltage. And so you can increase that breakdown voltage and make the capacitor hold more charge and work much more efficiently if you have a dielectric material between it. Now there's all kinds of materials that have been developed over the decades and centuries, literally, to make capacitors work better so that they hold more charge. But air, our air, just that you're breathing here, is a very good dielectric. So that increases the capacity of the vertical electric field capacitor to hold charge. And that is between the ionosphere, which is up at the edge of space, and the ground right beneath your feet, literally. And so that's the capacitor, and we live in that. And actually, if you walk outside, one of the healing benefits that people get is when they walk outside in the morning and the dew has fallen, and you walk out in your bare feet, and you become part of that electrical field, and there's a healing effect that goes along with that, because the dew on the ground connects you electrically to the ground, and so you become part of that electrical circuit. And so more current flows through your body than normally would happen. And so that there's a healing effect. But anyway, that's one effect of the vertical electric field. Now, what Tesla learned how to do, since he knew that vertical electric field was there, and by the way, what I feel is very interesting is when Tesla built his Wardenclyffe Tower, which was designed to extract energy from the vertical electric field, he didn't go out and build a little one, and then a bigger one, and a bigger one, as would happen with any other technology. Take automobiles, take aviation, take rocketry, You build a small rocket, you build a small airplane, you build a small car, and then you build bigger ones and bigger ones and bigger ones and bigger ones until you learn the technology and the wire sizes and everything else, all of the other things that you need to know to build a bigger one until you finally scale up. That's a term used in a lot of technologies, that the ability to scale, become bigger. That you develop all of the engineering, so to speak, that you need to make things bigger and bigger. Tesla didn't do that. He went out and built this giant Wardenclyffe Tower. The first time around, it would be the equivalent of the Wright brothers building a 747 on their first try. It's crazy. And so anyways, my belief, I talk about this in my book, Atlantis to Tesla, The Colburn Connection, which, by the way, was an amazing, that's my biggest selling book probably in history. The night it was released on Coast to Coast, it's pre-sold because I had written a book prior to that, was a very international bestseller. The Planet X Comets and Earth Changes book had sold wildly in around 2000, probably 1999 to 2000 timeframe. And so everybody expected that I was going to write another Planet X book. And so people bought this before they knew the title. It was available for sale. So the night that the title was announced on the Coast to Coast AM radio show interview, the people went crazy. And it sold at $42,000 in one night. And I had a big problem with my my merchant account because they were wondering what I did. How could I have these, normal amounts of sales? And I went way over my merchant limit. There's a limit if you have a merchant account on how much you can make per day, per month, etc. I went way over that. So they made me ship all the books. So I had to go through many, many printings of that book, send out the books. That's back in the day when books were printed and mailed in an envelope, etc. Had to do all of that. And when I showed them the receipts of all of the mailings that were done and the people got their books, they actually checked on it. They sent me the money. But it just sold like crazy because people loved that. And then it talks about the Colburn. That's another topic I'll be talking about on this show. But Atlantis to Tesla, the Colburn Connection. And it talked about secret societies, ancient science, etc. And I talk about the propulsion systems in there also. But at any rate, the main topic, one of the main topics there, was dealing with Tesla and the Wardenclyffe Tower. So the physics of the Wardenclyffe Tower, here's what was actually going on. Now, he was delivering the energy that he was collecting through the ground. And the reason he ran into trouble with Westinghouse is because Westinghouse realized that Tesla had fooled him. When Tesla sold all of his technology to Westinghouse to generate electricity, they were just chomping at the bit to sell electricity and energy. This is the same time that oil is becoming big, and Standard Oil and the Rockefellers, etc., are becoming big in the oil industry. So the sale of energy, automobiles were coming along. All of this was happening at the same time. In fact, there were electric cars back then. Porsche had actually built an electric car. And of course, it all went to oil and gasoline. There were streetcar systems in most of the cities in the United States at that time. And what happened was that they tore out the streetcars, forcing people to buy automobiles. And if you have grandparents or great-grandparents, maybe some of them are old enough still that they would have recognized the time when the streetcars were torn out. And so anyway, and I remember that actually when I was a little kid, there were still streetcars in the big cities, St. Paul, Minneapolis, when I was a little kid. And they tore those out and put in, basically covered them over with roads so that the people would drive automobiles. Okay, so anyway, back to the idea of the Wardenclyffe Tower. So what Westinghouse discovered with Tesla is that now he could extract energy free from the atmosphere and distribute it out to the people, therefore bypassing the system that Westinghouse had purchased from Tesla. So he was not exactly happy about this. There were other investors involved. J.P. Morgan was one of the big investors in the Wardenclyffe Tower and in Tesla's Colorado Springs operation, where Tesla would take his, it wasn't a big Wardenclyffe type tower, it was more like a ball, and a metal ball up in the end of a pole out in the middle of the Colorado desert. And he would gather electric energy from the atmosphere and distribute it underground, and he would put lights out in the desert and light them up at night using atmospheric electricity. And one night it got out of control, and this is one of the big problems with atmospheric electricity, is it got out of control and he blew out a generator plant that was near where his Colorado Springs operation was, and he had to pay for the generator that he destroyed because it got out of control. And eventually the distribution of energy by wire, the system that we have today, is very good. It's very controllable. And that's the thing with the distribution of energy in the ground. Tesla knew the resonant frequency of the ground and the transmission capabilities of electricity moving through the ground. But the problem is both getting electrical energy from the atmosphere and then distributing it through the ground is a very unreliable, uncontrollable process, and it would not work well on a large scale, the kind of scale where we have today, the amount of electric usage that we have today. So at any rate, it was one of those things. It's still there, it's still available, but I had a project actually in the 1990s to build a Tesla tower and recover that technology and actually put it into use. And then I realized there were a lot of environmental problems with it. One was when you start drawing the electrical energy from the atmosphere, from the ionosphere, you're going to kill a lot of birds. Not a good plan, or anything that's flying there. And this gets us up to the point of the Tesla death ray technology. So I'll try and talk about that a little bit at the end of this show. If not, we'll cover that in a future show. But I'm going to go through some of Tesla's inventions here. The first one is the death ray, and this looks like what you might call a linear Van de Graaff accelerator. And then a ray coming out from it, and that's literally what it would look like, but it's literally a discharge of the vertical electric field that comes down where the airplanes are. Now, I want to give you an example that people are probably going, oh, this is crazy. I want to give you an example that everybody can relate to. You go to the hardware store, and you know the backyard bug zapper, they call them? It's a zapper. It has a neon light in the middle. Then it has an electrical grid around the outside, which is, the outside one is ground, so you don't get a shock from it. And then the inside one is a high voltage. And that high voltage is set just at the edge of discharging the space there. And so what happens when a bug flies in, there's like a grid. The bug flies in, he takes the ground potential in with him, and bzz, he's just enough to cause the discharge of that capacitor, and zzz, it's always right where the bug is. And that has to do, by the way, with this picture up here of a comet. Let me see, there. The plasma discharge comet model is the exact same process, but it's using the capacitor that is built up around the sun with the fusion process, which has an excess current of protons in the solar winds. And that's what the physics of outer space is all about. And by the way, that is also the main source of electrification of our own ionosphere to ground process. That's the main source of energy that keeps this going, because without a source of energy, this would not last a New York second. So you need a constant supply of energy to keep that electric field going. Okay, so The first picture then is of the Tesla death ray. The second one is a radio-controlled submarine. Now that's very interesting. So Tesla was already dealing with remote control, and you might even step this up with if you could add a protocol to this, which he would, the signaling was a very primitive protocol, but it was enough to control a submarine. This gets us up to, I spent 25 years of my career working in the telecommunications industry dealing with telecommunications protocols. So what Tesla was doing with his radio-controlled submarine was exactly what we're doing today with Wi-Fi, with Ethernet, with the radio-controlled drones, etc. The next one is a museum example of the Tesla motor. And a motor can be a generator or a motor, depending on which way you're using it. If you're putting energy into the device, it can, through rotational physical kinetic energy, then it can produce an alternating electric current. If you're putting an electric current in, it can cause rotation. In other words, it's a motor. The next picture here, now this is a famous picture of Tesla in his laboratory, and my understanding is that this was a dual photo, that this was put together, and really he was not sitting in a laboratory that had all of this electricity going on. Okay, the next one is the first stun gun, another one of Tesla's inventions. So when the police walk up to you with a stun gun, if you're being arrested, then this is the original stun gun right here, another one of Tesla's inventions. Here's a page that talks about the hundreds of inventions of Tesla. I also have a catalog that is a compilation of Tesla's inventions. Okay, the next photo here, this is the cover of my book, Atlantis to Tesla, The Colburn Connection, and it's available as an individual book on my webpage, but it really should be read along with the other books that I have there and the education program. I wanted to remind you that the education program, if you look at the top here, my webpage is here, jmccsci.com. Just follow that. And the education program, the books, the lectures, the lecture series, all of that is available there. The next item is this is a Tesla turbine. Now, the turbine is a very, very interesting device. In fact, it is said that this was one of Tesla's very own personal favorite inventions. You know, like any inventor, he had his personal best invention, and this was one. And when you see how it works, the way the water, and they're just parallel plates, and you think, how does this work? The way the water goes in, and it's kind of like a clutch plate, a fluid clutch plate, literally. But it's such an amazing invention, and it's very few people, if it weren't for Tesla, we would probably not have these inventions. So at any rate, those are the inventions of Tesla. And let me go back to the Wardenclyffe Tower now. The Wardenclyffe Tower, here's how it worked. The electronics at the base were what are known as a Schmitt trigger. A Schmitt trigger is simply a DC battery. And by the way, the book Atlantis to Tesla talks about Atlantis having these technologies and the ability of space travel using electromagnetic propulsion systems, and also the ability to ride up and down this column of discharge, which creating a magnetic field. Okay, so basically the Schmitt, and the reason I mentioned Atlantis is because they had seawater batteries. That's where they got the initial DC battery to kick off the process of discharging the vertical electric field. So one of the questions, by the way, is did Tesla have access to this information? Potentially through his father, who ran the Vatican Library, in, like I say, in Kosovo, where he grew up. And then, of course, being a physics student, I can just see him there immersed in these old texts that describe inventions that potentially could have gone back as far as Atlantis. And so at any rate, but the Wardenclyffe Tower, once again, you have a Schmidt triggers, which is you take a DC voltage source and you short it out. That's all you do. And you put it, that's an AC signal because of the high, if it's a short, true short, then you get a tremendous surge of current, and you put that through a transformer, a Tesla transformer. Basically, a Tesla coil is a high ratio transformer, and so you get this huge spike, plus maybe 1,000,000 volts positive and then 1,000,000 volts negative. So you get this tremendous spike, and then you can do this with a rhythm. And from my understanding, Tesla was using about a 40 hertz signal. And what this was doing then is it would power up the bell at the top of the Tesla tower, and with a frequency of about 40 hertz. And what would happen, it would go swing high positive and then high negative, and that would take the ion pairs, the dielectric in the atmosphere. These are induced diodes, induced dipoles, dipoles, plus and a minus charge, and they would flip in unison. And so all of the atomic pairs, are plus and minus, are flipping in unison. And so what happens is that breaks down the dielectric properties of the atmosphere, and if you keep doing this, it drills up. I call it drilling an electrical hole through the atmosphere. It's the same thing that happens when a hurricane forms or when a tornado forms, but in that case, the cloud is doing it. Okay, so at any rate, now you have a hole going up through the atmosphere, and when you hit a breaking point, all of a sudden the energy comes flowing down that current path, and it is collected then by the Tesla tower, and that current flows out in the ground. And if you've ever seen, this is an example also of the same phenomena where you have cattle out in the field. Or also golfers, they tell golfers if it's lightning, don't stand under a tree, because the tree can take the lightning bolt and then the current flows out in the ground, and if it goes up one of your legs and down the other leg, it can cross your heart and kill you. And so that it's happened where entire herds of cattle standing under a tree when there's lightning hits are killed because of the electricity moving through the ground. And by the way, it's a very similar thing with EMP blast. If you have, say, an EMP that is either naturally caused or caused by man, then that goes through the ground, and that pulse creates, wreaks havoc with the ground, literally ground in the grounded circuits of the transmission of electricity circuits. And by the way, there's a way to cure that. I should talk about that on another show. I've been on government panels discussing this topic, where we want to protect the grid from EMPs, and it's a very simple thing to do. But anyway, that's the basis of Tesla's technology in Wardenclyffe and Colorado Springs. And I'll be talking in future episodes about more detail, let's put it that way. But those are the basics. So he was basically gathering atmospheric electricity, transmitting it through the ground, and that's why he got in big trouble with Westinghouse, is because he was going to bypass their ability to generate electricity and sell it, because Tesla would have gotten the energy for a far less cost. Okay, so at any rate, I just want to remind you, visit my webpage, jmccsci.com. I have the books, the education programs, there's the water filters, and the grow towers, something that a lot of people, especially as you head into winter, you can have a garden of fresh vegetables in your house. All that available on the webpage. Plan to spend some time there. There's currently about 15 gigabytes of information. Once again, jmccsci.com. Thank you, and we'll talk to you next week.
This has been Master of Science with host James McCanney. Join us each week as James will delve into historical figures such as Nikola Tesla, Albert Einstein, and the great mathematicians as we explore the history of man, Earth, and our universe as you've never seen it before. Tuesdays, 7 p.m. Eastern, right here on the Bold Brave TV network, powered by B2 Studios.